the deadliest pandemics in human history, the Plague of Athens. Back over 2,400 years, ancient Greece. At the time, Athens was in the middle of a brutal war, known as the Peloponnesian War. And to protect themselves, people from the countryside crowded inside the city walls, which turned Athens into the perfect place for a disease to spread. And then, it began. Historians believe the disease started somewhere in Africa, possibly Ethiopia or Egypt, and traveled through trade routes until it reached Athens. And once it arrived, it spread fast. Too many people, too little space, poor hygiene. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and the symptoms were terrifying. It started with a sudden, intense fever, then uncontrollable thirst, red, inflamed eyes. The body would weaken rapidly. Ulcers would appear, both inside and outside the body, and in many cases, death came within just a few days. Imagine watching people around you get sick in the morning and be gone by the end of the week. No one understood what was happening. Some believed it was punishment from the gods. Others thought the air itself was poisoned. There was no medicine, no cure, no explanation, only fear. The impact was devastating. It's estimated that between 75,000 and 100,000 people died. That's about 1/3 of the entire population of Athens. Even their leader, Pericles, didn't survive. And with so many people dying, society began to break down. Laws stopped being respected. People lost hope, and survival became the only thing that mattered. The plague lasted for several years, coming in waves, until eventually it faded. Not because they found a cure, but because so many people had already died, and the survivors developed some level of immunity. And just like that, a disease helped change the outcome of a war and the future of an entire civilization. Next, the Antonine Plague, one of the greatest empires in history, ancient Rome. At its peak, Rome was powerful, organized, and deeply connected. Roads stretched across continents, trade flowed constantly, armies moved from one end of the empire to the other. And without realizing it, they created the perfect conditions for a pandemic. It began around the year 165 AD. Roman soldiers were returning home after fighting in the east, but they didn't come back alone. They brought something with them, a disease. Historians believe it was either smallpox or measles, but whatever it was, it spread fast, through cities, through markets, through the very roads that made Rome powerful. And soon, people started getting sick. First, fever, then weakness, followed by severe diarrhea, and then a rash. Painful skin eruptions covering the body. For some, that was the beginning of the end. Many died. Others survived, but were left permanently scarred. At its peak, the plague was killing 2,000 people every single day in the city of Rome alone. Think about that. 2,000 every day. In total, it's estimated that around 5 million people died, and the effects went far beyond just numbers. The Roman army weakened, fewer soldiers, less control. The economy started to struggle. Some historians even believe this was one of the first cracks in the fall of the Roman Empire. Because when you lose people, you lose everything else with them. And just like previous pandemics, there was no real cure. The plague didn't disappear overnight. It came in waves over many years, until eventually it began to fade. Not because humanity defeated it, but because those who survived had developed immunity. Next, the Justinian Plague. Now imagine this, a disease so powerful that it doesn't just appear once, but keeps coming back for over 200 years. This was the Justinian Plague. It began around the year 541 in the Byzantine Empire, most likely originating somewhere in Central Asia. Before traveling along trade routes toward one of the most important cities in the world at the time, Constantinople, a city full of life, trade, and movement, which made it the perfect entry point for something deadly. But this time, the enemy wasn't human. It was a bacterium, Yersinia pestis. carried by fleas and living on rats that traveled on ships filled with grain. The rats arrived first, then the fleas, and then the disease. And once it started, it spread rapidly, from ports to markets to homes, until the entire city was infected, and the symptoms were horrifying. People would suddenly develop high fever, followed by chills and extreme weakness. Then came the most recognizable sign: large, painful swellings called buboes, usually appearing in the neck, armpits, or groin. Dark, swollen, and filled with infection. Vomiting followed, and in many cases, death within just a few days. Entire households gone almost overnight. At its peak, Constantinople was losing up to 10,000 people every single day. Bodies filled the streets, mass graves became necessary, and even those responsible for burying the dead eventually died themselves. It's estimated that up to 50 million people died, nearly half the world's population at the time. Even the Emperor Justinian caught the disease. He survived, but his empire did not. The initial outbreak lasted only a couple of years, but the plague didn't disappear. It kept coming back in waves for more than 2 centuries, generation after generation, living with the fear that it could return at any moment. So how did it end? The truth is, it never really had a clear ending. It slowly became less intense, possibly due to changes in climate, rat populations, or human immunity. But the damage was already done. Next, the Black Death. We arrive at one of the most terrifying pandemics in human history, a disease so deadly that it didn't just kill people. It changed the entire world. It likely began somewhere in Central Asia. In 1347, ships arrived in Europe, but they didn't just bring silk and spices. They brought death. As soon as the ships docked, the disease began to spread, from ports to cities, from cities to entire countries. And the symptoms were horrifying. Swollen, painful lumps called buboes. They appeared on the neck, the armpits, the groin, dark, inflamed, and extremely painful. As the infection worsened, the body began to shut down. People would vomit blood. Their skin would darken, almost turning black, which is where the name Black Death comes from. The scale of this pandemic was unimaginable. In just a few years, it killed between 25 and 50 million people in Europe alone. That's up to half of the population. Globally, some estimates go as high as 200 million deaths. Doctors had no idea what caused it. Still, for the first time in history, people started trying something new: quarantine. Ships were held outside ports for 40 days. People were isolated. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. Eventually, the pandemic began to slow down, not because of medicine, but because of a combination of things. Fewer people left to infect, better isolation, and some level of immunity in survivors. But here's what makes the Black Death different. It didn't just kill people, it changed society. With so many workers gone, labor became valuable, wages increased. The old feudal system began to collapse, and Europe slowly started to transform. From one of the darkest moments in history came the beginning of a new era.